Welcome to Rite Gud, the podcast that helps you write good. I'm R.S. Benedict. A lot of this podcast is about the publishing industry, breaking into it, working within it, and our frustrations with it. But some writers and artists strike out on their own. Joining us in this episode is Evan Dahm, writer and artist of Third Voice, Rice Boy, and other online serialized fantasy adventure comics. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed this podcast. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for saying that. I noticed on your Blue Sky you said you have many obnoxious opinions. I look forward to hearing those today.
Uh-huh. That was specifically in response to your recent episode about fantasy world building. Was titled provocatively Against World Building.
Yeah.
Which, I love it.
Yeah, we had to.
Yeah.
All right, so why don't we start off? Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and the kind of work you make?
I make fantasy adventure graphic novels mostly. I'm originally from North Carolina. I live in New York City. I have been creating and mostly self-publishing a series of fantasy adventure graphic novels since 2006, when I was in college in North Carolina. I've done these big, colorful, sort of surreal fantasy stories: Rice Boy, Order of Tales, Vatu, and Third Voice is this one that I started about a year and a half ago. And I've done several other things for publishers alongside those over the years, but the backbone has always been the serialized self-published stuff, and that is what I love doing.
Nice. Well, that sounds pretty great. Now, you've been doing this online mostly, from what I can tell, instead of working with like a publisher and putting out regular sort of graphic novels. Why did you choose to do this like self-published online?
I don't know, that's just kind of how I landed. So I'm teaching this class lately. I just finished my second semester teaching the webcomics class at SVA in Manhattan.
Yeah.
And it occurs to me, talking to these like undergraduate age students, that it was really kind of unimaginable. Like it was on the table to do when I was a young person trying to figure out how to make comics and take them seriously. It was like, it was available to me culturally that I could just put the thing online in an uncompromising way and maybe people would find it. But now you can still do that in certain ways, but it feels like it is much less easy to imagine doing that. And that's not their fault. That's just the culture we're in, maybe.
There was a really big webcomics boom in the early 2000s. Penny Arcade. There were mostly a lot of geeky gaming comics, but also a lot of interesting comics with really different, fantasy, adventure, horror.
Yeah.
It was just really, really big. I think that's how Matt Keeley and I, our producer, actually met, was on the forums of some webcomic or another.
Oh, that's cool.
It was really, really, really big at the time.
Oh, so you're familiar with the world of my the world of my origin here.
Yeah, it was really big, and it felt like everyone had one, and then that just kind of stopped.
In a way, I mean, it's big now too. There's a bigger variety of stuff, and it's kind of, the level of quality is hugely increased across the board.
Yeah, it sure looks like it. I remember that most of that stuff was fucking terrible.
But the place of it in the culture is very different, because the internet now is not, people don't habitually go to websites. People go to the platforms. We all are familiar with that trend.
Yeah, that's true. It was different then. There were websites, and there was the Keenspot web ring of this collection of semi-popular online comics and stuff like that you'd kind of bounce between. And I guess that's not a thing anymore, really.
Yeah. And I mean, there are like, and web rings generally, just these like little, really organic and socially embedded, proto-social networks. I think about this a lot, like the way that I built my audience and kind of still the logic by which I try to keep my work and my approach to having a readership is built on these organic modes of finding things and sharing things that are seriously discouraged by the way that the entire internet works now.
Yeah.
But like, it's still probably worth something. I don't know. I gotta think that that's still the way to do it, because I can't build my work around the Instagram algorithm or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds kind of nightmarish to try to do that as a creative. I know there are people who do manage it and do a great job, and I could not.
You know, the challenge is for me to look at that. I don't know. I don't want to be too judgmental about that. I mean,
Yeah.
I have my like approach, and my approach, I have the benefit of having some momentum from starting it before all these spaces work the way they do now.
Yeah,
But
I'm
I,
wondering if someone starting off now would be able to do that
I,
from day one the way you did.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, it would be slow going, but I mean, you know, if you're trying to build a genuine engaged audience with like the weird little thing you're making, that's a slow process, probably, no matter what the circumstance.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So, you decided to do all this on your own and go into self-publishing. For you, what are some of the upsides of self-publishing?
Yes. Oh, I didn't really finish the my answer to your question.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, that's my fault. Just it was less considered than it may look, or that I make it sound in retrospect. This was
Oh,
just like I had been making comics for a while in like high school. In early college, I started this project Rice Boy, which felt like the first time I like, you know, was saying something and was interested, was like really fully on board with the thing I was making. And the only thing to do was just to put it on the website,
yeah.
you know, to make a little website and put it there and hope people found it. Of course, I, like everybody starting out, wanted like institutional recognition. I wanted somebody to publish it or whatever, but it just didn't, that wasn't the avenue. Self-publishing it became feasible and just sort of became the engine of my entire career still. So
Yeah.
the upsides of that, though, I mean, one does not need a huge audience if you can cut out that much of the middleman stuff, right?
Yeah.
That's the big thing, and that allows you to be uncompromising in certain ways, and I have loved that, because, you know, the industry and the way that comics fit into our pop culture is really volatile and unpredictable and varies and is weird. And I just want to make the thing that I am obsessed with making.
Yeah.
And I don't. I mean, I'm trying to more consciously just double down on that lately. I can't. I don't know what the fuck else to do, honestly.
Yeah, you don't have a publisher or an editor going, can you make this less weird?
I do. I mean, I have done books with publishers, and those have been mostly pretty good experiences. But that I don't see that as the driving force of my whole deal.
Well, that's good. That's good. And I'm wondering if you got these traditional publishing deals after doing so well on webcomics, maybe if that gave you a little bit more, I don't know, strength or clout to be able to sort of stick up for yourself, as opposed to if you're just some newbie going, can someone please publish my comic, please? Go, okay, sir, I'll do what you want.
Yeah, I wonder. I guess y'all haven't talked to very many comics people on this podcast, have you?
Not a lot. Wendy Shu is a frequent guest,
Mm.
but she's really our main comics person who keeps coming back.
Because I do wonder about the different place of like my understanding is that like self-publishing is more of an understood part of the comics ecosystem than it is for prose.
Yeah, that's true. She started with a webcomic too, I think. Mooncakes.
Oh yeah, I know that one.
Yeah,
I've seen
that's
that one.
her.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have been able to get in with the publishers that I have gotten books that I've done books with without the benefit of, you know, mostly having a demonstrable audience, but also like showing that I can, you know, do the work,
Right.
that sort of thing. And then it does, you know, doing a lot of this stuff self-publishing, it gives me some perspective on like what are the compromises I am making in working with a publisher. What specifically can they offer me? Is it worth it? as opposed
Yeah.
to, my early on mindset was just like, well, I want a publisher because I want a book. I want them to
Right.
see my book.
Yeah, I want a book. I want lots of money and groupies because that's what happens when you're traditionally published. Is what we think before we're traditionally published,
Uh-huh.
and fame. And I'll go on talk shows, and everyone will love me, and I'll never be sad again. That's what will happen if I
Yeah,
get a traditional book publishing deal.
well, it might have had there, but for the grace of God, go I.
That is what will happen. You've dealt with a lot of the good side of self-publishing, and that you're independent, you're making your own decisions. What are some of the downsides of it?
I mean, it is a lot of work and it's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of infrastructural shit that I have never been able to really wrap my head around. I've never been able to get my self-published books distributed or in bookstores or anything just because I don't feel like I'm really infrastructurally good at that sort of thing.
Mm,
I have set myself a pretty intense schedule. I don't know that it's that much more intense than if I were working for a publisher, but the pressure to stick to that sort of thing and to be really kind of like self-destructively overworking
yeah,
is different because like if it were a publisher demanding these things of me on a contract, that's, an injustice.
yeah,
But if I'm doing it to myself, then I will just, run myself into the ground because it's mine. I can do whatever I want.
yeah, yeah.
uh,
It's you can't really negotiate or mutiny against yourself so much a lot of the time.
yeah, and there's this like tenuous feeling that I periodically have had where like I have a better work-life balance now than I have in the past. But there's this, people will tell you, oh, you deserve a break, or you're working
Mm,
too much, or you're working too fast, or whatever. But I have no structure for my entire adult working life. I have had no structure around me that guarantees me a certain amount of money or whatever. So like
oh
I just
shit.
I just make if I stop working, then I make less money. So it's like it you can see how that would be a sort of a self-destructive cycle.
Yeah, yeah. The freelancer trap in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Like I'm my own boss. Oh, I'm the shittiest boss I've ever had. Damn,
Yeah.
damn.
But I mean, it's not exploitation if you do it to yourself. I mean, all the labor that I am putting, all the free work, effectively, that I put into the stuff that I own is like not actually free work because it's my stuff.
Yeah. What kind of free work do you mean?
Oh, I just mean like early on before I had any guarantee on like making money on the comics that I was doing. I was just sort of putting all this work into making this stuff,
Right.
and it's not like I was exploiting myself because I was building my, intellectual property that has
Right.
sustained my career. Kind of. Does that make sense? That's the sort of dynamic I mean.
I get it. Okay. Your schedule. I went on there and I saw you're releasing a page a week, which I know might not sound like that much, but this is a page of full color.
No, it's a scene a week. It's probably
A scene. Sorry.
6 to 8 pages
Oh God,
generally.
that's so many.
Well, I mean, a scene is just my convention, but I present stuff as like pages of a book, and it's a certain number of pages a week. And I couldn't have, I just sort of have certain rhythms down where I know that I can get that amount done, and I like having a sort of more digestible chunk of the thing every week. Around when I started this comic, Third Voice, in late 2022, I was like rethinking a lot of my approaches to serialization and trying to like build a new approach that made more sense because I just sort of had been doing a lot of things that was just how it was done.
Yeah.
So a scene a week lately works. I have to take a break every so often, but I feel like it's a good rhythm.
Yeah, that's a lot. That seems like a lot. I mean, that's a lot of drawing. I am not a great artist. I don't draw good, but that takes a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I work pretty quickly, and a lot of figuring out how to do this stuff is figuring out how to do it in a quicker kind of industrial way. So that's part of it. Part of it is also is that I'm very engaged in what I'm doing lately. So if it were a slog, that would suck. But I'm able to
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah, I mean, you're passionate about what you're doing, I assume.
Mm.
That's good. You're making a serialized adventure, right? So why did you choose to serialize your work instead of finishing it all together and then putting it all out at once?
This is another thing that is just sort of circumstantial that in retrospect looks like a decision that I made, I think. Like, when I started Rice Boy in 2006, I wasn't really aware of webcomics, and there weren't very many that were like pages of a book, like a one big sustained dramatic story. But it made sense to just put them out one page at a time. And then as I kept doing this stuff, like that was how I do it. I'm building an audience, putting the thing page by page. Now that I have the perspective of having done a couple books for publishers and gone through the whole process of like, finishing a whole book in phases before I hear editorial feedback, and then like the book comes out and the publisher has all these promotional tools at their disposal, but once the book's out, and then nobody's talking about it a couple months later.
Right.
Maybe those promotional tools are a worthwhile trade-off, but it really makes sense to me to work on the thing serially and use the long-term space of it being a thing updating every week for years as an audience building thing. It becomes this going concern that people can see even if they're not actively reading it. It builds something for me that people are aware that this thing is going on that they can jump in on if they want to.
Yeah.
That's how I think of it now, and I think it's a good way of doing it.
Yeah. I know you started this before there were just 3 websites, before social media was really huge. So I'm guessing growing your audience back then was a very different ballgame compared to what it is now. But I feel like social media is in kind of a weird place right now too, and I'm wondering if maybe some of the old ways will return out of necessity, considering so many of our big social media platforms are very jank at the moment and are actually throttling links to other sites. Facebook is rather notoriously like cutting back traffic to a lot of other websites right now. So has Twitter. I suppose TikTok. Well, America is trying to ban TikTok right now, so I don't know how useful that's even going to be anymore. So how did you grow an audience in the before social media times, and then did you have to adapt to a different strategy in the new era of social media?
This is the weird part about teaching the class, because what I see is this like huge transition towards like the corporate internet is just like how it has always been to people who are in their early 20s,
Yeah.
And like there's all these ways of thought that I still hold on to, but that feel like old-fashioned now because they're so incompatible with the thing. But I do think that there's some probably universals, like things that still apply even within this new space, like taking the work seriously and being uncompromising with it, and trying to have a sort of respectful relationship to your audience, and not trying to like scam them or mislead them. I guess that's a harsh way of putting it, but
You'll never be a proper influencer.
yeah.
You'll never be a streamer. You gotta sell gambling apps to children. That's how you make the big bucks.
Yeah, but like everybody kind of implicitly knows that there's these short-term gambling ways of developing an audience or whatever, of being an influencer or whatever, and that's not, that doesn't appeal to me. But I'm a person who like connects with particular pieces of art and like is committed to them, So I gotta think that that's a relationship that people can have to a thing that's presented honestly. So that's what I'm going for. But yeah, I don't know. It was different back then. I just sort of like made a little website and put some stuff on LiveJournal, and then within several months, the sort of webcomics social ecosystem was dimly aware of me. Ryan North, who does Dinosaur Comics, are you familiar with this?
Oh yeah,
Of course, you must.
I remember Dinosaur Comics.
Who I incidentally just talked to for a minute at TCAF this past weekend.
Nice.
I think him linking Rice Boy in like 2006 or 7 is probably the reason that it took off. to begin with.
Nice.
Which is like, that's a different thing from blowing up, going viral on social media now, because that is a social thing that takes place. I mean, Ryan recommending a comic to his readers, he is doing that as a creator to his audience, but it is a more honest and social thing than other types of blowing up that we're more accustomed to in the modern internet.
Yeah.
That's the distinction I'm trying to pinpoint lately, I guess.
Yeah, I know what you mean. This is something that somebody is specifically recommending. As I saw this, I think it's pretty cool, check it out, versus here's something the website, a type of content that the website has decided to promote. Because even if you do share a link or share something, we all know the screwy algorithms might emphasize certain content and de-emphasize other kinds of content. And it's not 100%, even if you are resharing or reblogging or retweeting or whatever it is called on your platform. No guarantee that's actually going to be seen. And how it came across your eyeballs was probably a little bit more organic too, and less about like, well, this post on Facebook was boosted, so you saw it.
Yeah, and it can be like, I don't know. I mean, it's too easy to feel too bleak about this, because it is a bleak and human thing. But we're still people, and people still get interested in things, and people still are passionate about things made by other people, and art still appeals to people because it's about high context communication, so I feel like, I don't know, that's what I am holding on to.
Yeah, I hope so. And I'm kind of wondering if maybe I'm being optimistic or naive that we're going to see some kind of social media collapse, or at least see things being shared and moving around in a different way than what it's been for the past 10 years.
Yeah, I'm optimistic on that front.
I kind of hope so.
There's a lot of people, who remember the old model and want to go back, but then there's a lot of my students just openly hate this shit in such a refreshing way, So yeah, I don't know. I'm encouraged about that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that some of these big social media platforms, Twitter has literally never been profitable.
Mm-hmm.
So it's weird that it even still exists, and it looks like it's just kind of in free fall. I don't know what the fuck Facebook is doing anymore. What it's even becoming. I don't know. I don't know. It all just seems like a weird mess.
They've become disgusting. I mean, Facebook I see so much AI shit, like grotesque, horrible AI shit on there. I don't go on there anymore.
Yeah.
Twitter is now recommending just the most awful stuff, so I only just post my promotional stuff there. I don't interact with them in the way I used to.
I stopped going on Twitter after they reinstated the child porn guy.
That's right. Jesus Christ.
Like, that was the most fucked up thing. I'm like, I don't want to be here. I feel like Chris Hansen's gonna show up on my door if I fucking post here anymore. I'm done. I'm out. Fuck this. Yeah. We've definitely gotten less traffic on the podcast as a result, but I'm okay with that.
I mean, that can't... Well, that status quo cannot maintain. I mean, like, a website like that, at that scale, it cannot exist in a circumstance... I don't know. That something's got to give there. Yeah.
Yeah. God. Yeah, I would love to see if our online media landscape could change again. Maybe it'll change to something even more horrific. I doubt we'll go backwards, because that's never how it goes, but... Maybe we'll see something a little more organic, like in the good old days. I don't know. But if you young people want to know what it was like, go play a game called Hypnospace Outlaw. That is what it was like to be on the internet in, like, 1999. It is the most perfect simulation, and it's amazing. It's magical.
I mean, it was like an uncolonized space, in a way. Can it go back? You can't take the institutions and the money out of it, really.
No.
You can, like, build sort of nature preserves, I guess.
Yeah.
For the old logic, but
yeah, didn't the original Space Jam website go down or something? That I feel like that symbolized the end of an era.
Yeah.
That's it. It's over. It's not going back. The Space Jam site's down. It's gone. R.I.P. But anyway, so online, there's a lot of content. And a lot of it's really, really bad, and a lot of it's made by plagiarism robots. So how do you, as a self-published creator, get your work to be seen? Like, how do you stand out in this massive ocean of online content?
I mean, there's like my answer to that, and then there's the like, what should a person do approaching this new,
Yeah, I don't think anyone can really give accurate recommendations in terms of like, here's what you should do, because it's different for everybody, and especially it's different depending on the kind of work you do and who you
Yeah.
are as a creator. For a lot of creators, you can be like, you're an influencer first almost, and your work kind of gets big from that. But I think a lot of creatives aren't really interested in doing that. You know, like maybe you can sell your books by being very spicy on social media, but for a lot of us just don't want to do that. That sounds miserable, or you just don't. It's just not you. So instead, what I'd ask is like, what did you do? Maybe it won't work for all of our listeners, but maybe it will work for some of them. I don't know.
Yeah, I mostly have just sort of tried to have the various spaces that I am on the internet self-evidently like demonstrate that I am constantly making this stuff and I'm putting it online for free. The main thing is that I'm making this huge amount of material over the years and people can read it for free, and that is my promotional thing. I mean, getting people to see it in the first place, that is a tricky thing and would be trickier now if I was just starting out than it was.
Yeah.
I don't have access to a lot of promotional infrastructure, but what I do have is the capacity to just make my work available for free and build audience attention and engagement that way. And people do, if they like it, want to buy the book. I mean, I understand that.
Yeah.
What I'm wrapping my head around lately is that, like, as all these platforms are running into their walls,
Right.
I am trying to wrap my head around this idea that, like, you know, I have an audience that is interested in what I'm making. I'm trying to, like, support a certain type of engagement with what I'm making and to encourage my audience to see it as work that exists outside of the platforms, you know?
Yeah.
So when Twitter dies, or when I fully abandon Twitter because I have seen too many fucking snuff films on there or whatever.
Oh, God.
Yeah, this is apparently a real problem. That's what
Whoa.
broke it for me. Sorry, shouldn't say that.
No, that's
maybe.
okay, but like, Jesus Christ, man.
When these things die, I mean, the idea is that, like, I'm still making the work, and if you're interested in it, hopefully you are interested in it enough to follow me somewhere else or whatever.
Yeah, you can go to riceboy.com and there won't be snuff films on it, presumably.
Yeah, unless something's gone very wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, how do you get your work to be seen and stand out? I don't know. I mean, I mean, I feel like I am doing something that is very unusual and very particularly my weird thing.
Yeah.
This is not because I'm special, you know, anybody can do that.
Yeah.
To some extent, it probably stands out a little because it is that. I don't know. It's hard for me to pinpoint this sort of thing.
Yeah. You, the creator, can never really guess what of your work is going to be the big thing. The thing that you thought was going to be really good or like really get attention is kind of ignored, and then the thing that you didn't really expect people to give a shit about is the thing that goes super big. You're going, huh, okay.
Yeah. And then there's like different types of attention too. A thing that goes super big, it might be very shallow attention from a huge number of people. But then the thing that you're more attentive to and devoted to and committed to might be a very small number of people, but it is a type of attention that where they will, you know, personally invest in it and follow you along for years and years. I've never had a huge audience, but I have people who've been really interested in my work who I know pretty well personally now, who've been around for like 10 years or something.
Nice.
That's cool.
That is cool.
That's what I want.
That feels pretty good.
I love that.
Yeah, you're just making a small weird thing for a group of small weird people.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds pretty good.
I mean, I feel very fortunate about that. Absolutely.
I think that's the goal for a lot of our listeners.
Yeah.
I am making weird stuff for about 30 other people.
Yeah.
And as long as they're there, I'm happy.
And I wish I had more specific advice about
Yeah.
getting to that point. I mean, I just have my autobiography about it, you know?
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your creative process. You work mostly in comics. I'm not sure if you've done much prose. Can you talk about the difference between how you'd approach comics versus prose?
I have done prose, but not in any publishable way, and I don't know, I get a lot out of prose, so I have some sense, I think, of it. The main thing is efficiency problem, and how it takes a huge amount of time to cover comparable amounts of narrative material, I guess, in comics as opposed to prose. We call them graphic novels, but to make something that feels like a novel, in my experience, in the medium of comics, it has to be, decades of work, basically. I like working with visual material, and I feel like there are types of visual literacy that get really sidelined or lost in our culture that it is gratifying to me to engage with. I don't know. There's ways in which it's probably a lot more schematic. Like I can't, planning has to take a very different role because I can't really go back and edit stuff. Even if I'm not serializing it page by page, editing a comic is a very different thing from editing a prose thing. And then like nailing everything down into like pages and graphic design elements, like that's just a type of concern that doesn't really exist in prose. It feels kind of like clunky or inelegant to have to balance all these things in ways that prose never feels to me. But I've never really written prose seriously, but it feels like a hybrid kind of very clunky industrial art form to me sometimes, but I love it. I mean, it's the only way I can think to do storytelling in a pretty uncompromising way visually, basically.
Nice. Would you like to talk a little bit about your approach to genre fiction?
Okay, the world building podcast, I'm totally on board with all of y'all's thoughts.
Yeah.
It rocks. Very, very smart stuff. Some deserved criticism of the Brandon Sanderson school of literalistic fantasy storytelling.
Well, I've been reading your comics, and I see that it appears that it does take place in some sort of world, and yet you're against world building. Checkmate, Evan.
In a way. I mean, it's funny. So that is one of the things that is most like loudly evident about the work that I do is that like it's in a fantasy place. So a majority of interviews and conversations that I've had about this stuff probably have been about that. And then like in the early to mid aughts, I ran a series of panel discussions at comic conventions with different cartoonists about world building. I don't know. I've thought a lot about this stuff. And there are certainly uptight, literalistic, self-defeating ways that we're all aware of that you can do that, right? Like the idea that you have to figure out the whole geography of a place is before you write the story.
No, fuck that.
Makes no sense to me.
Fuck that. Use a map of Florida. Like Pierce Anthony. It's
Pierce
in
Anthony.
Florida.
Because, I mean, what are you really trying to communicate? No one, unless the story is about geography, which is an interesting angle, I guess, then, I don't know, it has to come down to what you're trying to communicate to the reader. And you're balancing that, of course, with like the implication, hopefully, that there is more beyond the bounds of the story, but not that much more. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
I think about this motivating idea of like genre fiction generally, or like fantastical fiction generally, where it is about literalism. Like the way I explain this is in literary fiction, if there's a ghost, the ghost is a metaphor for a character's regrets or memories or whatever.
Right.
But in genre fiction, a ghost is literally a ghost, right? And it's creepy and he's there and he's going to get you. And like in fantasy fiction, the fantastic world isn't a dream or an allegory. It's literally a place. So like there is that tendency to like take it seriously and delineate it all as like an objective thing. But it's just so much richer to balance that with some awareness of like what you're doing metaphorically, literarily, I guess. I mean, y'all talked about Le Guin, who is like probably my favorite fiction writer ever to have lived. Like she does that really brilliantly. She's obviously working from a tradition of like extremely like, nerdy kind of objective sort of journalistic fantasy and science fiction storytelling, but she's using it in this rich, politically motivated way. Yeah, and I learned a lot from her, just sort of obliquely, I think.
Oh, she's amazing. The goat.
The goat.
The absolute goat. So as I'm reading your comics, I'm noticing there's a lot of weird little guys. A lot of weird little dudes in it.
Fair.
So tell us about your fondness for making weird little guys. Where are these weird little guys coming from?
This is related to the world building question. Because I'm working in a visual medium, it has always made sense to me, or I guess the innovation that I hit upon with Rice Boy when I was literally 18 years old by accident, is that, oh, I can just make up how every fucking things look. These don't have to be like human being shaped characters, right? If I'm drawing it all, why not just make it all look kind of fun?
Yeah.
This felt like a huge revelation to me, and I have stuck to it with the vast majority of my work. And there's ways in which like it puts the cartooning on a different level of abstraction. Like ordinarily cartooning, one of the ways that people use that word, is about drawing a person from reality in a way where the voice of the drawing suggests something about the person.
Right.
The way that I think that I have, I don't know, short-circuited that process is that, in theory, the voice of the drawing of all the stuff that I'm doing is very, like, journalistic and straightforward, but it's the world itself, it's the characters themselves that look all these weird sorts of ways. That's an idea I'm still wrapping my head around, but I love the freedom that it gives me in terms of, like, character design, and, yeah, I don't know. I try not to be too, like, uptight or explanatory about it, like, the temptation is to like delineate all the different like species of weird little guys or whatever, or like to make them all like fantasy world races or whatever, but I'm just not interested in that. And I want to more and more actively just not engage with the sort of race scientific aspects of the history of this tradition of fantasy pop culture, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think I know what you mean. Yeah, a little bit. Even in, like, well-intentioned, politically progressive, a lot of these things, it's like, okay, so there's the race that very obviously represents this ethnicity. There's the race that represents space Latinos.
Yeah.
There's okay, I see what you're doing there. I don't know about that.
But it's one of those things that, like, it can be done sort of abstractly enough that you can kind of not see it, or that the writer could maybe not have seen it. But, like, I don't know. We got to think about this stuff if we're working with, because we're in a tradition here as fantasy writers or whatever.
Yeah, definitely. These are all serial stories, and some of them are really long ones. Do you plan them out meticulously ahead of time, or do you kind of play it by ear?
I guess I have done kind of both in different ways. So Rice Boy and Order of Tales, the first two that I did between the ages of like 18 and 22, 23, something like that, they're both like kind of planned. I didn't plan them in the detail, but I was leaning heavily on certain kind of typified, you know, mythic adventure Lord of the Rings type stories that allowed me to not have to plan that much. With Vatu, it's very much like there's these big narrative trajectories and there are big thematic ideas and every step has to sort of move along these tracks. It was kind of planned, and then all throughout the process, because it takes so long to draw the pages and you're doing it front to back, all throughout the process I am like working and reworking the outline of the coming, you know, hundreds of pages or whatever. It is basically by virtue of doing that comic over the course of literally 12 years that I feel like I am reasonably comfortable opening up a lot of space for me to improvise for this new thing. Like Third Voice, it is like one big sustained thing, but there's like chunks of it that are very different sorts of stories, and there's big parts of it where I have basically just said that I hope I can fucking come up with something, you know? And like I'm reasonably sure that I can come up with something because like I'm feeling engaged in this thing, you know? The development that I have gone through here is that early on it seemed like planning was always the way to how do I say this? It seemed like planning would always keep me safe, right? Like, right. These are long projects. They represent a lot of investment of effort. I don't want to fuck them up, so I better plan them out perfectly, right?
Right.
But then if you work long enough front to back on one comic book, it is impossible to not have a lot of space of just open improvisation in that process. There are certain ways of loosely planning to give the impression of a tighter structure for that improvisation to exist within. But it's improvisation. And a lot of my approach to Third Voice has been, I guess, reckoning with that and reading a lot of, other types of serialized comics, seeing how improvisation has worked in other types of storytelling like that, and having some sort of faith in myself to, plan enough and know the sorts of planning that are useful and the sorts of planning that are a little too uptight and brittle. And, I'm very happy with the first book of this comic, so I'm happy with it so far. We'll see. I mean, there's lots of ways that it will be clunky and rambling, but I don't know. I'm having fun.
Nice. You've mentioned that you have this very, I think, really intense schedule. How do you keep to that? Like, how do you manage your time? Do you often find yourself finishing it at the last minute? How does your week go in between these scenes coming out?
I've been doing this schedule for Third Voice since late 2022. It's, I guess, very occasionally 4 pages, but usually 6 or 8 pages a week. I don't know. I have a sense of how much that takes. I know I can pencil that in a day or 2. I can ink that in probably 3 days, and I can color that in 2 days.
All right.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I normally have it done a couple days early and put it early up on Patreon.
Nice.
It's my job. It's the main thing I have to do every week.
Right.
So there is that. But also I'm mostly engaged in it, and I like the physical process of it. It also helps me wrap my head around writing a whole lot. I can't believe I did Vatu just 1 page up a time, a few times a week through that whole process. Why? That's such a wild, stilted thing. I wasn't able to maintain momentum and have a bigger picture of what I was doing like I am now, I think.
I see.
But the main thing is, I wake up early. I like doing what I'm doing. I get really focused on it, and I know how much I can do, basically.
Nice. Now, you mentioned Patreon. If you're comfortable talking about finances, would you like to talk about how you managed to monetize this?
Sure. For the majority of my time doing this, it's been about book sales. I would get an edition of a book collection of one of the comics printed, an edition of 1,000 or 2,000 copies typically. And because I'm self-publishing it, I'm not splitting the money that I make from those books with anybody. If you get 1,000 copies of a 400-page color graphic novel printed, you can get that down to $5 or $6 each, something like that. So you sell that at a normal retail cost for a book like that, and that is a lot of money for one book to an individual self-publisher. That's the logic by which a lot of my stuff worked for several years. That's still a part of it. Mixed in with that, I've done books with publishers that I make some money on, although in a less predictable and sort of more scattered way.
Yeah.
With the launch of Third Voice, I did these big promo videos to try to push a new kind of logic and to present the Patreon that I'd been running for several years as more okay, I'm doing this thing. I'm putting out, a monthly American comic books amount of pages a month. If you like it, $2 a month. If you like, no pressure. I'm just trying to push that more, and, I make a good amount of money on that. It's great. It makes me a little nervous to rely on the Patreon platform, which has the same, venture capital wall that it's going to hit at some point.
Yep.
But, again, I guess, ideally I have an audience that I can just sort of maintain some connection to in some kind of way, if not there.
Yeah.
That's the main stuff. It basically, a lot of it early on for me just came down to how much does it cost to get a book printed? Am I reasonably sure that I can sell all these books? Am I able to ship all these books? And then in 2015, I started working with Topatico, which is a company that has been doing distribution for web comics and a bunch of other sort of independent internet art stuff. They've fucking saved my life. They're incredible. They do all my fulfillment and stuff for the past several years. I struggle to delegate and work with people, but they saved my life, I think.
Yeah, no kidding. How long did it take you to get to a place where you were able to support yourself on comics full time and not have to worry about a day job or anything anymore? Granted, doing this is your day job, but
Yeah.
You know what I mean.
Basically right out of college, I had a couple of little jobs in college, but I was mostly taking the comic more seriously than going to school. I forget exactly. I got a book printed late in college and was like selling prints and stuff, my own mail order stuff. I was doing occasional comic conventions, and I was making enough to live on in North Carolina very cheaply right out of college. And then I moved to New York in 2010 and was doing an insane amount of comic conventions and getting a lot of books printed and living very cheaply. But I mean, I feel I don't know, I feel it's embarrassing. I feel very fortunate to have been able to do that, I guess.
Yeah, that's cool. Let's talk a little bit about letting your freak flag fly. I know that self-publishing leaves you freedom from censorship in a lot of ways, but like how free is it? I know if you're using a platform to market yourself or promote your work, you are going to be at the mercy of the terms of service agreements and algorithms. And from what I can tell of influencers and online creators, whether this is people who do it for a living or people who just do it for a hobby or whatever, there does seem to be a really intense and really immediate pressure from the audience for certain kinds of art a lot of the time. Like, oh, I want to see these two end up together, or I want to see a happy ending for this character. And whereas a novelist will like finish the novel and send it once it's published, then people will like yell at you, like, why do you kill this guy? If you're doing this every week, this is coming to you like right away after you put it out. So do you ever feel that pressure sometimes to maybe like pander? Maybe, I don't know if pander's the right word, but sort of appeal to the audience a little bit more? Or do you ever feel this sense of like, oh, do I really want to do this? People are going to be really mad. The instant this goes live on the website, a bunch of people are going to send me angry messages.
Mm-hmm. I have that feeling sometimes. I don't know, by the time I'm committing to doing something intense that will like upset people, then it's worked into the structure so much that I probably can't change it, or it would feel awkward to change it. I do get that. I was so worried about this sort of like stereotypically badass bounty hunter guy killing a really sympathetic character several months ago in the comic, and like I really didn't want to do it, kind of, but it had to happen at that point. And like in a way, I mean, people getting upset about it, it's a compliment, right? That means they're engaging with it I would be upset about it, it means they're engaging with it in the way that I want, honestly. And I love that. I did feel a lot of pressure. I remember early on with Vatu, which is the third big comic that I did. It's nominally set in the same invented world as the other two, and I felt some pressure. I don't know how much it was even articulated to me, but I felt some pressure to include more specific, like textual connections to the other things set in the same world. I would have done that. I don't know. But Vatu was so much its own thing and had its own concerns that it made sense to just double down on that, I guess. And then when I started Third Voice, it's set in a different setting, and this sort of like nerd culture attention, which I say that with love, this like nerd culture attention to the invented world and the meta continuity between the stories and everything, that has been such a big part of like my pop cultural space and the way that people talk about my stuff, that I was really nervous about that. And in one of the launch videos, I did this like big apologetic thing, not really apologetic, but kind of apologetic about like, look, I know it seems like kind of sad that this is not set in the same universe as the other comics, but I mean, it's all just in my head, and I'm still the person making it. And I mean, if you're interested in this stuff, it's not because it's set in one particular invented world. You're interested in it because I am making it in this particular way, and it's me. I'm sorry, I was trying to think of specific examples of that, and that's what I thought of. The censorship stuff, I mean, that doesn't directly apply to me in a lot of ways, because I've always been pretty invested in making like kind of just pop cultural stuff. I mean,
right.
It doesn't really occur to me to get too aggressive or risque with anything I have done creatively.
So you're never going like, oh, I'm gonna go crazy just because I can. Fuck you, Dad. None of that?
Not really. I mean, well, Vatu is a pretty politically intense book, I think. But that's because that's what it built to, and that's what made sense to me. It doesn't feel reactive, like you say.
Yeah.
And then I did this book for Iron Circus called The Harrowing of Hell a couple years ago.
Yeah.
Which, God, this is a whole other thing. But it's kind of like a Christian anarchist angle on biblical apocrypha and the Gospel of Mark, right? It's an adaptation of some biblical shit with like a pointed political angle. And I feel like a lot of people expected that to be edgy, you know? Because it's like, it's a book about hell and Jesus is in it. And like, oh, wouldn't it be fun for there to be a bunch of cool demons?
Yeah.
But it's just like, it is, I don't know, these things just are what they are. And I am happy with that book.
Nice.
I don't know that I totally addressed all that stuff. The censorship thing doesn't apply to me, but I am extremely sensitive to the fucking problem. And, you know, when creators who make pornographic work or creators who are somewhat more visibly queer than me are like shut out of these platforms, this is a catastrophic thing to the entire space in which we all are operating, you know?
Yeah.
This is another way in which it's probably helpful to try to, I don't know, build a sense of our work as a thing that exists outside of the platforms and to have a really cynical kind of mercenary approach to the platforms. Like, you know, they're your enemy, but a lot of people are there, so fucking use them, but they're our enemies, absolutely.
Definitely. All right, now we've been recording for about an hour. Before we wind down, where can our listeners find and support your work?
Thank you. rice-boy.com is where I do a bunch of the serialized stuff that I do. A huge amount of stuff free to read there. I have some books out with First Second books and Iron Circus comics. I have a new book out called The Last Delivery, out in June from Iron Circus Comics. It's like
nice.
Like a horror thing.
Cool.
But, you know, my name everywhere. I'm easy to find.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. Lovely to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And thank you all for listening. If you like what you heard, please head to patreon.com/writegud and subscribe. Until next time, keep writing good.
This has been Rite Gud with R.S. Benedict. It was hosted by R.S. Benedict and produced by Matt Keeley for KS Media LLC. Theme song by OK Glass. For comments and concerns, please write to us at writegud@kittysneezes.com. That's RITEGUD@kittysneezes.com. If you'd like to support us, please visit our Patreon at patreon.com/writegud. This has been a Kitty Sneezes production.
kittysneezes.com in color.